Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us for our first public workshop, California's first public workshop, to discuss our approach under US EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, or CPRG for short. I'm Shireen D'Souza. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Climate and Intergovernmental Relations at a California Environmental Protection Agency. Thanks so much for being here with us today. We're really excited to have this first workshop. The CPRG program is an important opportunity to bring lasting climate solutions to our state. We've appreciated the chance to work with US EPA so far to get our CPRG work plan application in order. And now we look forward to the work we will get to do with all of you over the next 4 years to create climate plans under the CPRG program. As you'll see from the presentations from different state agencies today, through the CPRG process, we're strengthening California's outreach, coordination with stakeholders, and our whole of government approach to tackling climate change. We hope you all will learn more about our CPRG efforts, and we look forward to your comments today. In addition, we hope to hear from you throughout our ongoing CPRG discussions. Together, we can best create plans to use all available resources to maximize emissions reductions and bring lasting benefits to our state and our communities. Thanks again for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah Jo Shambhalan.
Thanks so much, Shireen. Really appreciate that. I'm Sarah Jo Shambhalan, International Advisor in the Executive Office of the California Resources Board and another point person for California's CPRG efforts. Before we get started, I want to make sure that everybody can participate in the language of their choice. So next slide, please. Today's workshop will be available in English and Spanish through simultaneous translation. To select the language of your choice, click on the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select your language. I will now let the interpreters relay this message in Spanish as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. Esta reunión se va a llevar a cabo en inglés, sin embargo, realizaremos interpretación para que todos puedan elegir el idioma de su preferencia. En la parte de abajo, brevemente, haga por favor clic en el icono de un mundo y se elija el idioma que guste escuchar para esta reunión en las opciones de abajo, inglés o español.
Thank you. And now I will start interpretation. Great, thank you. Next slide, please. I will also go over some logistics. This workshop is being recorded and will be posted to our CPRG meetings and workshops page. We have 2 hours allotted today. We have a great turnout with hundreds of attendees. And as you will see in the agenda, we'll have a number of state agencies that will prepare remarks as well. Before we will open the floor for comments, we will work to hear from as many commenters as possible. So we will ask stakeholders to keep their feedback to no more than 3 minutes. And to submit longer comments in writing, stakeholders will be able to submit written feedback until August 24th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. You can find a link to submit feedback as well as relevant documents, including this presentation on our CPRG meetings and workshops page. Next slide. Today's agenda has 4 main parts. First, we will begin with an overview of the broad federal funding landscape and California's strategy to attract resources and maximize emissions reductions. Second, we will dive into the CPRG program and give an overview of the state's work plan under it. Third, we will hear from 6 state agency representatives on California's existing climate plans that will greatly inform California's deliverables under the CPRG program. Last, we'll have a little over an hour to hear comments, feedback, and questions from participants. Thank you for holding your comments and questions until the presentations conclude. This is our first public workshop on the CPRG program. It will be followed by in-person workshops this fall and winter. We hope today's conversation is a helpful starting point in an ongoing conversation with you all. With that, I will pass it over to Grace Curtis to introduce herself and present.
Thank you so much. My name is Grace Curtis. I am an executive fellow at GoBiz. And today I'm going to talk about federal funding and how the state leadership is maximizing IIJA and IRA funds for California. You can go to the next slide, please. So just kind of to lay out the magnitude of funding that exists out there. In IIJA and IRA alone, there is about 1.6 or $1.7 trillion in combined federal investments. That's just under 500 programs in both of the acts, and they span a variety of funding categories that you can see there on the slides. They span from transportation, climate and energy, broadband, pollution, climate smart agriculture, and much more. And if you go to the next slide, here is a sort of visual representation of all the programs that exist in both the acts. Each dot there on the outside of the rings there represents one program that is contained within these acts. Just to kind of give some perspective, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program that we're going to talk about today is just one of those dots. So there's lots of opportunities out there. And you can go to the next slide. So GoBiz is partnering with this nonprofit organization called Atlas Public Policy, and they have been a great resource for us. They house something called the Climate Program Portal, where they do a deep dive on the implementation of IIJA and IRA. And they have incredibly helpful dashboards for helping us break down all of this funding. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. And just to kind of give an overview of the Climate Program Portal dashboard, that's what it looks like right there on the right. And this kind of gives a breakdown of all the sectors. So we have electricity, transportation, other climate, which is mostly environmental justice and resilience and other programs like that, commercial and residential buildings, agriculture and industry, which is like manufacturing and stuff like that. And in climate related funding alone, there's $663 billion out there. So this portal really outlines all these programs really well, and there's lots more breakdowns. You can go one more slide next. This is kind of just giving another little layer into how detailed this portal gets in breaking it down. For all these sectors, they have subcategories of funding. So there's, let's see, there's $255 billion in electricity, and there's subcategories like renewable energy, solar, and wind, just as an example of some of the tags. And each of those sectors has lots of tags. So highly would recommend checking out the Climate Program Portal. .gov emails register for free, and it's a great resource. You can go to the next slide. So kind of just touching really quickly on state efforts. So what's the state doing? Who's doing what? A lot of our work at GoBiz has been trying to get in touch with all the agencies and figure out who's doing what. We see some roles popping up. The infrastructure strike team that the governor established through Executive Order N823 in May of this year has been a great effort in coordinating all the agencies on federal funding and infrastructure projects. Program tracking and reporting deadlines, interagency coordination, direct project engagement, and green financing are some major roles we're seeing forming. And you can go to the next slide. And this is kind of just to show all of the agencies that are involved in all of these roles. So even though there's tons of programs out there, it really is an all hands on deck kind of a situation. We're putting in a lot of effort to capturing this funding. This isn't a complete picture, but it's just kind of the engagement that we're seeing. So yeah, hopefully this gives you a sense of where we're at on our efforts. And you can go to the next slide. One more just little clip from the Climate Program Portal is it's not too late to get involved. That little bar down there at the bottom shows that only 3% of funding has been awarded so far for climate related funding. So definitely not too late to get involved. I would recommend just going out there and finding out what exists. And if you go to the next slide, there's tons of resources to get you started. We have, or next slide, please. So the Atlas Public Policy Climate Program Portal is a great resource to get started. Also on GoBiz website, we have Federal Funding Opportunities webpage that outlines all the resources we use beyond Atlas Public Policy. And the Governor's Office of Planning and Research also has a federal grants portal where they are reporting on deadlines and opportunities. And lastly, the White House IIJA and IRA guidebooks are incredibly useful for exploring all the different funding categories. So it's not too late to get involved, and there's plenty of resources out there to learn about this funding landscape. And with that, I'll pass it on to the next presenter.
Thank you so much, Grace. And just one more plug on federal funding programs before we get started diving into the CPRG program in particular. US EPA is holding a funding fair next week, and I wanted to pass along this flyer that they shared with us. You can see here that there is a QR code and a link to register if you're interested. Also, the schedule shows some different events that will be a part of this funding fair. So if you're interested in learning more about these particular programs, please do register and join us. Okay. So next slide, please. So now I'm going to jump into a part of our agenda where we're going to kind of go over what the CPRG program is and California's work plan under it. So created through the Inflation Reduction Act and administered by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the CPRG program has two phases. In the first, states, metropolitan areas, tribes, and territories applied for planning grants to deliver 3 climate plans over 4 years. In the second phase, entities can compete for $4.6 billion in federal funding to implement the actions in the first plan, the Priority Climate Action Plan, or PCAP. In California, the state and 9 metropolitan areas are participating in the CPRG planning grant phase, as well as some tribal nations that fall within California's boundary. Next slide. California submitted its high-level work plan on its approach to deliver the 3 CPRG climate plans over 4 years. The full work plan can be found at the link listed here, but the slide summarizes California's distinct priorities for each of the 3 climate plans. For the PCAP due next March, California will prioritize outreach and coordination across the many state stakeholders and tribal nations. Given that listing actions in this PCAP is a prerequisite for competitive CPRG funding, this outreach is critical. The Comprehensive Climate Action Plan due in 2025 will look at all greenhouse gas sources and all carbon sinks and a longer list of climate actions. This plan will require more analysis alongside continued outreach and coordination. Finally, the 2027 status report will coincide with the next scoping plan update. It will include a summary of implementation actions as well as next steps to achieve emissions reductions. Next slide. In addition, California's work plan under the CPRG program includes many analytical and process pieces that will be core to each of the 3 CPRG climate plans. These include continual conversations and coordination with stakeholders across the state, as well as with tribal nations, ongoing synthesis of the state's existing and emerging climate plans and reports, a package of greenhouse gas measures, including updating our statewide greenhouse gas inventory and greenhouse gas projections, and relying on greenhouse gas targets from state statute. We will also estimate the emissions reductions of climate actions using methodologies similar to those developed in the scoping plan process. We will also conduct several analyses to evaluate the climate actions that are included in each of the CPRG climate plans. These include analysis of the benefits of climate action and how those benefits are distributed across low-income and disadvantaged communities, the authority of the state to implement proposed climate actions, how CPRG climate actions complement the state's overall federal funding strategy, and workforce needs and implications of proposed climate actions. Next slide. There are also many contributors to each plan. This is a list of the types of partners we will engage, including the state CPRG task force members, local governments such as metropolitan areas, counties and cities, air districts, tribal nations, low-income and disadvantaged community members, private sector stakeholders, and members of the public. Next slide. Like all of California's climate efforts, the development of statewide CPRG climate plans requires multi-agency coordination. Our success under the CPRG program will require close coordination with and understanding of the jurisdiction of other agencies, particularly the CPRG task force members, which are shown here. Next slide. Until next March, California will focus its CPRG efforts on the development of the PCAP. California will have ongoing conversations with both tribal nations and with statewide stakeholders. In addition, we are at the first of 3 major touch points in the CPRG process. Today, we are hosting the first public workshop on the efforts under the program. In the fall, we will host 3 in-person workshops in different areas of the state. In these, we will dig deeper into specific climate actions to potentially include in the PCAP. In early winter, we will hold another public workshop to go over and receive comments on our draft PCAP. Next slide. So now we will turn to presentations by agencies listed here on their existing and emerging climate plans. While the actions the state includes in the PCAP will not be final until after rounds of stakeholder input, we know that all actions will be aligned with the plans that already guide California's robust climate policy. Next slide. We will begin with the scoping plan, a critical piece of the state's overall climate policy. AB 32's landmark climate bill of 2006 requires the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, to create and update the scoping plan every 5 years. The scoping plan is an actionable plan to meet statewide greenhouse gas reduction targets, taking into account all relevant laws, directives from the governor, and feedback from the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee and a robust stakeholder process. Ultimately, each scoping plan is a high-level document spanning all sectors that lays out a comprehensive story of the state's multifaceted climate strategy. After each scoping plan is approved, state agencies review, update, or develop new regulations and programs to align with the scoping plan and based on established roles and authority. Once regulations and programs are in place, on-the-ground projects are built. Next slide. The 2022 scoping plan update charts a path toward carbon neutrality by 2045 and to reducing anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions 85% below 1990 levels by 2045. This is the first scoping plan to look decades into the future and to grapple with carbon neutrality. It also centers equity throughout. Next slide. Achieving carbon neutrality requires using all possible tools to reduce and remove carbon emissions from the atmosphere. For AB 32 emissions, the scoping plan uses a broad portfolio of existing and emerging fossil fuel alternatives and includes achievement of the Zero Emission Vehicle Executive Order, limiting internal combustion engines in new vehicle sales and in most legacy vehicle fleets. For natural and working lands, the scoping plan uses land management across land types, prioritizing restoration and the enhancement of ecosystem functions to improve resilience, reduce negative climate change impacts, and stabilize carbon stocks. Next slide. Achieving carbon neutrality is California's most ambitious climate goal ever, and it will deliver major benefits. It requires unprecedented action across all sectors. The metrics here show the scale of the transformation called for within the next 2 decades. The 2022 scoping plan shows that by 2045, we need 37 times as many light, medium, and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles on the road, 6 times as many electric appliances in homes, 1,700 times as much hydrogen supply, 4 times as much installed wind and solar generation capacity, and action on over 2.5 million acres of natural and working lands per year. The key outcomes are part of a suite of actions driving substantial greenhouse gas reductions. Achieving the plan's outcomes would result in a 94% decrease in liquid petroleum demand, a 91% decrease in fossil fuels used in buildings, a 66% decrease in methane emissions from agriculture, and a 10% reduction in wildfire emissions. Next slide. Analysis from the 2022 scoping plan shows that compared to the baseline, the scoping plan would reduce air pollution associated with fossil fuel combustion by 71%, resulting in over $200 billion of annual health cost savings in 2045. Similarly, it would reduce PM 2.5 emissions from wildfire by 10% on average compared to business as usual, resulting in an additional annual health cost savings of $3.1 billion per year. Next slide. Using the most recent social cost of carbon estimate, the implementation of the scoping plan would avoid 6.5 to 23.9 billion in climate damages in 2045. Considering that the estimated direct costs for the scoping plan are 22 billion in 2045 for the AB 32 sources and 6.5 billion per year for natural and working lands, climate and health benefits of action far outweigh the costs. Next slide. Low income and communities of color face disparate impacts from climate change and from the costs of confronting it. As such, it was essential that the 2022 scoping plan uplift equity. Through the work of the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, CARB incorporated over 6 of their recommendations into the scoping plan. The scoping plan also calls for a multi-agency discussion to equitably transition from a carbon neutral energy system, and that clean technology implementation closes existing health and opportunity gaps. Next slide. So with that, I will turn things over now to Jen Phillips at CNRA. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Let me know if anyone can't hear me. Glad to be here. Thanks for that opening, Sarah. I wanted to talk a little bit about our natural and working lands climate smart strategy at the California Natural Resources Agency. And just to start off, I'm Jen Phillips. I'm Assistant Secretary for Climate Change at the California Natural Resources Agency, and really excited to be part of this conversation. So as a bit of background, Governor Newsom has called for more ambitious work on our nature-based solutions for natural and working land sector to really deliver these climate goals that Sarah just outlined. This was an executive order that was issued in October 2020, and it really does call for sort of a comprehensive nature-based solutions agenda, including a goal of establishing 30% of our lands and coastal waters and conserving 30% of those waters by 2030, and also calling for the development of a strategy on nature-based solutions, which is this plan here on the left, natural and working lands climate smart strategy. So next slide, please. We released that strategy, the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy, in April 2022, and it was a really important input to the work of the scoping plan and really does guide our work on our conservation and our restoration and our management of our natural and working lands. California's natural and working lands make up nearly 100 million acres of California's total 105 million acres, so a huge percentage of our state is covered by these 8 land types on the screen here. As we developed the state's natural and working lands climate smart strategy, we divided our lands into these 8 land types on the screen. And these are really consistent with international carbon accounting methodologies. They have also served as a really important foundation that we can model and analyze and measure climate action on our lands, which we did in the scoping plan that Sarah just talked about. And we were able for the first time to set a carbon stock target for our natural and working lands in the 2022 scoping plan. I want to dig in a little bit more to the natural and working lands climate smart strategy. So next slide, please, Sarah. The strategy is long. I just printed it out, but it's like 115 pages, and it does a lot of things. First and foremost, it outlines sort of the state's efforts to date on increasing climate smart land management, but it also really digs into a lot of other things. So I would encourage you to look at the appendix that lists sort of all of the state's current actions, including policies and programs and regulations. Next slide, please. The real heart of this strategy, though, is really how we outline our priority actions to deliver climate benefits through improved land management in the years to come. And we outline potential benefit of different climate smart land management on each of those 8 landscape types. So I would encourage you to dig into that section of the strategy. Next slide, please. This strategy, as I mentioned, does kind of outline specific actions to deliver climate benefits on each of the landscape types. And this is a snapshot from priority nature-based actions or solutions in our sparsely vegetated lands and our desert ecosystems. Next slide. Also in this natural and working lands climate smart strategy, we include maps to show where those 8 landscapes can be found across California. And this slide here shows our croplands land cover across the state of California. Next slide. In addition, after we kind of look at holistically across the state, where are these land types, we developed regional snapshots. So we developed these regional snapshots that really show how every region in California can contribute to our climate change goals through different climate smart management. Next slide. I would say, going forward, we have this really important framework for land management across these 8 priority landscapes. But really, we need to double down on tracking and measuring the benefits of our climate smart land management. And this is a challenging area of focus for California, and I know many other states across the country. So this strategy also really outlines a section in identifying efforts underway to measure and track progress. And it also talks about, where we need to go next to do more. Next and last slide. And I just wanted to throw this up. Sarah had something up similar, but our natural and working lands climate smart strategy was a really important input to the 2022 scoping plan that Sarah just talked about, but also is a really important driver for our state's climate resilience agenda and our California climate adaptation strategy. So we really see the potential of our nature-based solutions to, of course, store and sequester carbon, but also be really important for resilience benefits in the state. So just wanted to contextualize where this planning effort fits within the state. And of course, it pulls from so many other plans at the regional scale and sectoral scale that many of our departments and colleagues here on the line work on. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen. Really great to hear from you. At this point, I would like to turn the floor over to Virginia Jameson. I don't think she has any slides, so maybe if it's okay, we'll just leave this one slide up.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Virginia Jameson. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Climate and Working Lands at the Department of Food and Agriculture. And I don't have any slides. The ones prior to me provided a lot of really good context, so I think it's okay. Basically, in terms of what plans inform our agency's current and emerging efforts, CDFA's efforts are informed by a number of plans, probably going back to a 2016 report done by a group we convened called the Climate Change Consortium for Specialty Crops. And that report outlined a number of resilience and adaptation measures, including things like installing water meters, soil moisture monitors, cover cropping practices to help improve soil health, which in turn increases moisture holding capacity. But because agriculture is so cross-cutting, it's referenced in just about every climate plan that the state has, including the scoping plan, which you just heard about, and the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy that Jen just went into. So in terms of broad goals and strategies for agriculture, the scoping plan calls for measures like an additional 80,000 acres of climate smart practices yearly. That includes things like healthy soils practices, cover cropping, composting, things like that sequester carbon. And it calls for protecting an additional 6,000 acres from development each year. I think Jen had a slide about that. And basically the strategy at this time is to provide enough incentives and technical assistance, big focus on technical assistance for doing those types of activities. With the hope that eventually there will be more market mechanisms that will encourage those types of practices. We also have goals for reducing methane related to dairy and livestock. That was a 66% reduction goal that Sarah mentioned. So one of the biggest challenges is getting markets to pay farmers to do this work. We know we can't, as a state, incentivize them forever, and nor can we incentivize them on enough acreage. And Jen also brought up this challenge with the lack of consistent methodologies for measuring, monitoring, and verifying practice results. So that makes it hard to do things like sell carbon credits sequestered. And then there's other really practical on the ground challenges, like how you integrate practices like cover cropping into your rotations and make sure that you have the water to do that. We also have the challenge that there isn't currently a way to know what practices are helping on or happening on every acre of cropland, unless we're the ones funding it, we don't necessarily know that it's happening. So that makes it hard to know how close we are to meeting that goal. We do know that the USDA is currently collecting comments for a federal strategy to advance greenhouse gas emissions measurement and monitoring for both ag and forestry. So we're hoping to see some advancements in that area. And then on the dairy and livestock front, a big challenge is the lack of a viable product to help reduce enteric emissions from livestock rumen. And so there's at least one product working its way through the Food and Drug Administration, and that's a start. But after that, we're still going to have to figure out a lot of things associated with the use of those products, like how to make sure that they are evenly distributed in food and how to get animals in pasture-based systems to eat them. So lots of challenges, but lots of efforts underway. And I think I'll stop there. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Virginia. If we can advance to the next slide. Great. I think we'll have Owen from California Energy Commission go ahead and introduce himself and present.
Good afternoon. I'm Owen Howlett from the California Energy Commission. I'm not able to start my video. Is that, Sarah, is that something that we can fix? There we go. Thank you. So we appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and we appreciate CARB's leadership on this statewide coordination. If you can advance the slide. Thanks. The CEC sees the following opportunities as key actions to prioritize for this federal funding. This is an initial list that's been reviewed by staff and commissioners, where we're open to additional ideas. First, targeted investments to address opportunities in residential and commercial buildings. The California Building Decarbonization Assessment that CEC wrote in 2021 found that HFC refrigerants contribute about 15% of direct building GHG emissions. As the state installs more heat pumps and the demand for air conditioning increases due to increasing temperature and more extreme heat waves, the use of refrigerants will increase and could lead to unnecessary emissions if action is not taken to use lower GWP refrigerants. Next, reclamation, education, incentives, and enforcement. The US EPA reports that less than 2% of HFCs are currently reclaimed. So we're recommending that funds should be allocated to identify and address barriers preventing refrigerant reclamation. This could include workforce training, providing incentives for refrigerant recovery, and developing effective tracking and enforcement. Next, incentives to transition to low GWP refrigerants. We need to ensure that as dollars are spent on decarbonizing buildings through heat pumps, kicker incentives should be used to encourage the use of low GWP refrigerant heat pumps in California's buildings. Specifically in California's decarbonization programs. These include the Low-Income Weatherization Program, known as LIWIP, the Building Initiative for Low Emission Development Program, known as BUILD, the Technology and Equipment for Clean Heating Initiative, known as TEC, the Self-Generation Incentive Program, known as SGIP, and the California Electric Homes Program, known as CalEHP. So you can see there's a lot of opportunities there. Also, the upcoming Equitable Building Decarbonization Program that the CEC is currently working on. Next is safety testing of low GWP refrigerants. The California Energy Commission has a long history of commissioning research to support new regulations and programs. Federal funding would help us to investigate the real-world safety performance of those low GWP refrigerants that are classified as flammable. And lastly, in this section, alternatives to diesel backup generators in tribal and rural areas. This would reduce emissions during grid outages caused by extreme climate events, which disproportionately affect those areas of the state. Second topic here is the industrial sector. The industrial sector is a source of 23% of statewide GHG emissions, and it represents decarbonization opportunities that should be targeted. For instance, industrial heat pumps present low or zero carbon alternatives for food processing and are already used in Europe. Deployment of these technologies in California to demonstrate the performance and benefits will move the industrial sector toward clean heating and process systems. One way to support this is to bolster two existing programs that are run by California Energy Commission. One is the Industrial Decarbonization and Improvement of Grid Operations Program, known as INDIGO, and the other is the Food Production Investment Program, known as FPIP. And lastly, in this section, research is needed to develop high temperature heat pumps for other industrial processing applications. Heat pumps typically work well at low and medium temperatures, but some high temperature applications are problematic. The last topic here is embodied carbon. This is the energy and GHGs that are embodied in the manufacture of building materials, such as concrete and sheetrock. These are a source of GHG emissions, and they present a new opportunity to reduce emissions from the residential and commercial building sectors. Market infrastructure is needed for tracking and labeling embodied carbon to inform builders and developers to enable the industry to make low carbon decisions. California can potentially enact embodied carbon standards via the procurement and construction of our own state buildings and via the Cal Green Building Standards. California as a state is making great progress toward our GHG emission reduction goals. Additional support and implementation of these climate funds will improve the air quality and health of our buildings, homes, and communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Owen. Next up, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. Next up, I will invite Luam to introduce herself and present.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Luam Tesfaye, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Energy and Climate Policy at the California Public Utilities Commission. Thank you to the Air Resources Board for the opportunity to contribute to today's workshop, where I will highlight some of the CPUC's climate priorities. The CPUC has broad regulatory authority over energy, water, telecommunications, and transportation utilities, but I will be focusing my presentation on the work we are doing in the energy sector. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the general climate policy flow framework for California. I'm sure it's familiar to many of you on the workshop that have been working in this space for a long time. And the framework, as you all know, really begins with the legislation and the executive orders and targets that provide that direction to CARB for the creation of their scoping plan over all of these years. The CPUC is one of a number of state agencies that look to CARB scoping plan to see what programs and regulations we should be taking action on. So for example, to reduce emissions from the electric sector, the CPUC engages in integrated resources planning to ensure that California load-serving entities, which include the investor-owned utilities, the California, the community choice aggregators, and the ESPs are all procuring safe, reliable, and cost-effective electricity to supply for ratepayers in support of Senate Bill 350, Senate Bill 100, and our other greenhouse gas reduction legislation. In order to do the IRP process, we manage a robust stakeholder process at the CPUC, and we work closely with the California Energy Commission in its role to produce the demand forecast, identifying the expected electricity loads, as well as working closely with the California Independent System Operator, who manages the transmission planning process to identify the transmission grid expansion needs to deliver electricity to customers. Through this process, we have ordered over 18,000 megawatts of electricity procurement to help the electricity sector reach the needed greenhouse gas reductions, and that number will continue to grow to meet the goals of Senate Bill 100. Next slide, please. Outside of the integrated resource planning process, the CPUC has undertaken a number of strategies and initiatives to reduce GHGs. These slides highlight these programs and investments which we are implementing with equity at our focal point. To highlight a few, we have our building and transportation electrification programs, which are important keys to achieving California's continued GHG reduction goals. CPUC programs and actions directly support a cleaner, smarter grid that can supply energy for these expanded uses as the state transitions away from fossil fuels in the transportation sector as well as buildings. These include the Building Initiative for Low Emission Development Program, or BUILD, which funds near zero emission technologies and new residential buildings, and the Technology and Equipment for Clean Heating Initiative, which is called TEC, which builds out the market for low emission space and water heaters in new and existing residential buildings. In 2022, we also took steps to end ratepayer subsidies and incentives for natural gas line extensions. California was the first state to end subsidies for gas line extensions. California ratepayers were providing over $160 million a year to subsidize natural gas line extensions. And so this provides both a ratepayer savings as well as supports greenhouse gas emission reductions. Also on the slide, I wanted to highlight that the CPUC manages compliance with the Renewable Portfolio Standard for the California IOUs, CCAs, and ESPs. Senate Bill 100 increased the RPS to 60% by 2030 and requires all the state's electricity to come from carbon-free resources by 2045. Next slide, please. So this slide continues highlighting these initiatives. We had IRP, which I highlighted earlier, and the CPUC has also ordered the investor-owned utilities to implement time of use rates to help flatten demand and reduce GHG emissions from gas peaker plants. CARB has also created goals on increasing hydrogen supply, and the CPUC is working with GoBiz to support the ARCHES initiative, the Alliance for Renewable Clean Hydrogen Energy Systems, and to secure IIJA funding for that initiative. And we also have oversight over the natural gas utilities and their hydrogen blending demonstration programs. The CPUC also supports California's cap and trade program by implementing the carbon price signal to all electric and natural gas customers, by including carbon costs as part of rates, and implementing the climate credit for ratepayers. And then in addition to all of this, the CPUC has authorized ratepayer-funded programs to support behind-the-meter battery storage, distributed energy resource programs, and customer generation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. So just this last slide is me thanking you all for the opportunity to present. And I always end my presentations with a plug for hiring opportunities at the CPUC. So if any of these programs interest you, please get in touch. Next, I'll pass it over to Sunshine Swinford from California Volunteers.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Sunshine. I'm the Climate Action Director at California Volunteers. We are the state office tasked with engaging Californians in service, volunteering, and civic action to tackle our most pressing challenges. We're supported by a 25-member board of commissioners appointed by the governor. Its role is to fulfill the statutory responsibilities for state commissions under the National and Community Service Trust Act of 1993. First partner Jennifer Sywell Newsom is an honorary chair, and we're led by California's first Chief Service Officer, Josh Friday. Next slide, please. Our vision is that every Californian contributes to improving community and enhancing our quality of life through service and volunteerism. Our mission to cultivate the opportunities, infrastructure, and culture necessary to empower every Californian to positively impact our communities. Not only are we utilizing the power of people to address challenges such as the climate crisis, we're also uniting and connecting communities through a common purpose that in turn leads to more healthy and meaningful lives. Next slide. Our programs are built around a service pyramid model that creates meaningful opportunities for all Californians to engage. There are 3 levels to the pyramid: serve, volunteer, and act. At the service level, this is about creating more dedicated opportunities for individuals, principally through AmeriCorps, and connecting those service opportunities to long-term careers. At the volunteer level, this is about connecting those who want to act with organizations that need help. And finally, at the ACT level, this is about creating opportunities for individuals to take meaningful actions in their own homes, lives, and communities. Next slide. There are more than 5,000 service members supporting climate action throughout the state in our various programs. California Volunteers administers the AmeriCorps portfolio with more than 60 programs providing critical services to thousands of people. College Corps is the first of its kind initiative with colleges and universities to create debt-free pathways to college while engaging thousands of students across the state to serve in climate action, as well as K through 12 education and food insecurity. Youth Job Corps is a partnership with local governments and community-based organizations to employ low-income, former foster and justice involved, and unemployed youth to help tackle critical issues such as COVID-19 recovery, food insecurity, and climate action. And finally, the California Climate Action Corps is the country's first of its kind state-level service program solely focused on climate change. Next slide. Climate Fellows serve full-time for 11 months with public agencies, tribes, nonprofits, and educational institutions. Fellows support measurable projects that help protect our most vulnerable communities within 3 focus areas. Urban greening, these are initiatives that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, mitigate the effects of extreme heat, and provide additional benefits such as decreased pollution and energy consumption in low-income communities. Organic waste and edible food recovery initiatives. These are initiatives that support the reduction and recycling of organic waste, as well as collection and redistribution of edible food that would otherwise be disposed of to people in need. Wildfire resiliency initiatives that support defensible space, home hardening, fuel reduction programs to protect high-risk communities, while also reducing toxic wildfire-related air pollution, as well as reforestation programs post-fire. Through these activities, the Climate Action Corps is contributing to the state's climate adaptation strategy priorities by strengthening protection for climate vulnerable communities, as well as partnering and collaborating to leverage resources. This program also supports the state's Extreme Heat Action Plan priority by enhancing the adaptive capacity of communities and advancing local climate adaptation planning through increased climate-related service. Next slide. This is just to learn more about our climate work and programs. You can visit our website and or follow us on social channels. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sunshine. And thank you, Luam, as well. If you want to move to the next slide, please. Great. So we'll now move into taking comments from all workshop participants. As a reminder, if you'd like to share feedback or ask questions, please use the raise hand function, which should be located at the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window, as shown. When a staff member calls on your name and activates your audio controls, please click the unmute button and proceed to introduce yourself and provide your comment. Stakeholders will be able to submit written feedback online until August 24th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. You can find a link to submit feedback as well as all relevant documents on our CPRG meetings and workshops page. As a reminder, we will limit comments today to 3 minutes to accommodate as many people as we can. We will have a timer in the right side of the window so that you can know how much time you have remaining. I will also note that we have Ray Saraceno from EPA on the line until just 3 p.m. So please do raise your hand if you have any questions for EPA. With that, I will now pass things on to my colleague, Amanda Mattis, who will be facilitating the public comment session.
Thanks so much, Sarah Jo. First up, we'll be hearing from Lisa Tonica. Lisa, please unmute yourself and begin.
Apologies, I think I raised my hand by accident.
Oh, no worries. Next up, we'll be hearing from Stephen Rosenblum. Stephen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and begin.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Stephen Rosenblum. I'm a member of Climate Action California, and I'd like to thank you very much for these presentations. I had some specific questions for Virginia Jameson, particularly about if she would be willing to say something specific about measurement of emissions from natural and working lands. I realize that's a difficult problem, but without real methods of measuring what's there and what we're doing and whether it's had any effect, without any useful measurements, it's very hard to quantify if we've done anything, particularly on, as she alluded, on farmland, when you may want to look at every acre or every 10 acres at a time. You know, 1 million acres is a lot of area to cover. And the second question is about dairy and cattle emissions. Is in the same vein, measuring enteric emissions from cattle. I think we need better data on that, and then data on experiments that show when, say, feeding programs have an effect on methane emissions, enteric methane emissions or not. So if she would be willing to say something specific about it, I'd really appreciate hearing it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that comment. I think, unfortunately, Virginia had to drop off. I don't know if Jen Phillips has anything to say, and if not, we're happy to take your comment and see if we can get you an answer.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. This is Jen Phillips. It's a really good question and definitely, you know, a challenge for us. There are different, you know, on-ground measurement techniques, and then there's LiDAR too that, you know, we can employ in some cases. And then of course we can kind of extrapolate from there and do statewide modeling, but it is an area that will need kind of continued support and discussion around how best to measure and monitor our progress, but something we're really, really focused on in this next year and this year ahead as we think about the implementation of the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy. So happy to talk more offline about that and bring Virginia into the conversation as well, since she's a really close partner to ours on our overall natural and working lands efforts at the state.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have Alberto Ayala. Alberto, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and begin.
Thank you, and thank you all of you from the state agencies for providing this informative workshop. I'm Alberto Ayala with the Sacramento Metro Area District, and I guess I have a question perhaps for you, Mary Jo. I'm sorry, Sarah Jo. As you mentioned, there are 10 of us in California. So in addition to the state, 9 specific MSAs with lead agencies identified. And I wonder, what are your thoughts in terms of the potential coordination on very specific elements of the CPRG work plan? I'm thinking GSG inventories, projections, targets, the quantification of reductions. It does make sense to me that, you know, the state is the keeper of the statewide numbers. Might there be an opportunity for coordinate and downscale these to the regional MSAs that are going to be putting together PCAPs as well? So I wonder if you can offer some thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Alberto. For this one, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Rajinder Sahota.
Hi, thanks for that question, Alberto. We are going to be looking at how to work with MSAs and districts to make sure, one, that we understand what the needs are in those regions, to make sure we're not duplicating those efforts in the state plan. 2, to make sure that we're looking at the jurisdiction so that if an MSA or a regional county is going to be asking for funds and we're asking for funds, we maximize our chances of getting those funds by also tying it to jurisdiction to implement those programs or policies that would be supported by those funds. That means that even though that there are different pots of money, one for MSAs or one for states, if the state puts in an application for money that is about infrastructure for charging zero emission vehicles, and the counties would do that for their pot of money, we're still competing against each other. And so what we want to essentially do is make sure we at the state coordinate with all the local regions and the MSAs, understand what their jurisdiction is and the projects that they want to pursue, identify what we want to do with our own jurisdiction, and then have a complete story to tell for California so that when US EPA reviews those applications or reviews those grants, they see that there aren't any duplications for the same kinds of grants or programs that are being proposed. There's clear jurisdiction to implement those, and that it's an easy way for them to review and then grant those monies back to whether it's the MSAs or the state. In terms of the inventories, the state does have a very long-standing inventory that has been developed per statutory requirements under AB 32. When it comes to the inventories that are going to underpin the CPRG, it doesn't have to be at the same level of detail or disaggregated as we have at the state level maintained in California. And I know that US EPA has made guidance available for MSAs on how to develop a regional inventory or MSA boundary inventory. To the extent that the state has a mapping tool on our website that talks about greenhouse gases and criteria pollutants and can be overlaid with county boundaries and air district boundaries, those estimates are available now to help support that inventory development at the MSAs. But other than that, there's really no other disaggregated inventory that the state keeps, because we were authorized under AB 32 to maintain and develop an annual statewide inventory, and that's where our resources have gone to date. We did not get additional resources to help develop city level or county level or MSA level inventories, but we know we have data on our website in our mapping tool that could help support that. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Next up, we have a phone call, 707 number. If I'm giving you permission to speak, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself and begin. It's a 707-391 phone number. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and go to the next question. Leila Atala, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. You can go ahead and begin, and we'll start the timer.
Thank you very much. Leila Atala with RMI. Thanks again for this presentation. My question is around the extent to which CARB and collaborating agencies are planning to create new policies for the Priority Climate Action Plan versus compile existing policies from other state plans. Thank you.
I'm happy to take that one again. So we're very lucky that this opportunity came about at the time that the CARB board adopted the 2022 scoping plan, which was just last December. As a part of the state plans that CARB has, other plans also exist across other state agencies. There's an update coming through on the SB 100 process, which is the clean energy grid, the clean electricity grid that CPUC, CEC, and CARB are working on. There is also the 1757 work going on at Natural Working Lands with CNRA on targets there. So as those plans move forward over the next year or so, we will be incorporating any of those into the state PCAP. It's not just going to solely rely on the 2022 scoping plan, because we want to recognize more detailed efforts are underway to evaluate sectors across other agencies to support implementation. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment. Next up, we have Barbara Lee. Barbara, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and begin.
Thank you so much. My name is Barbara Lee. I'm the Director of Climate Action and Resiliency at the County of Sonoma. My question is, I think, a fairly standard and general question, and that is, will you be making the recording of this workshop and the slides available on your website?
Thanks, Barbara. Yes, we will be making the slides and this presentation available on our website. The link to our workshop website for the CPRG program is listed on the slide here, so you should be able to find it there. Thanks.
Next up, we have Jody London. Jody, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm Jody London. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for Contra Costa County, and I've been participating with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and their working group on how that particular metropolitan statistical area will participate in this program from EPA. I'm really glad to hear y'all say that you want to make sure we're not duplicating requests, that we're streamlining as much as possible. And I definitely have some ideas on that I can share at a later date. I don't know if I'll get around to submitting comments in writing, but I've shared them with the Air District staff. My other suggestion for all of the agencies is that rather than create, and it's in line with this same theme, rather than creating situations where we're competing with one another for funding, really consider block grant funding for local governments. In Contra Costa County, we have 19 cities. Most of them do not have staff, even half a person dedicated to working on climate issues. The more you can make it easy for them to access these funds, the more likely they're going to be to participate. And I would refer you to the 2013 implementation that the Energy Commission did of the Prop 13 grants for energy efficiency upgrades in schools across the state. That's my main suggestion is, give us the resources to do this. Another thing CARB could do to help us would be to prepare greenhouse gas emissions inventories for local governments, because most don't do it and we have no way of measuring our progress, and we could really use your help with that as well. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jody. Appreciate that.
Next up, we have Richard Fennelly. Richard, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and begin.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
hello?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Great, thank you. I am calling from the East Coast. We're a startup company, and we've studied something that needs to be combined with HFC refrigerant replacement, and that's preventative maintenance on all cooling equipment, refrigeration, AC, and even air source heat pumps. Electric utilities in California should take a look at this. We've studied it. There's a global study that basically estimates a 25% overuse of electric across the HVACR cooling sector because nobody does coil cleaning on their refrigerators, air conditioners, and even air source heat pumps. My email is richard@coilpod.com. And I'd be more than willing to share everything that we've seen in this sector. We're trying to get Con Edison here in New York City to look at it. There was a story published in 2021 that commercial refrigeration emissions in general are causing the grocery chain and the building owners in the city to ask for reprieves from Local Law 97. There's been a lawsuit filed in New York City to throw out that law, and those folks are behind it. So I would strongly suggest that preventative maintenance initiatives need to be linked to HFC refrigerant replacement initiatives to give a holistic energy efficiency boost to all cooling. The cooling sector globally consumes 20% of all electric. And the Carbon Trust in the UK, in the study I can provide, estimates a 20% reduction in that 20% draw if you do maintenance on cooling equipment. That's a 4% total reduction in electric demand. That's massive. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. If you would like to submit any of those comments in writing, it sounds like you have a lot. Please feel free to do so. Thank you.
So I'm not seeing any more hands raised right now. If anyone, oh, just kidding. All right, next up we have Tanya Narath. Tanya, you can go ahead and begin. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Tanya Narath and I'm the Director of Climate Programs for the Sonoma County Regional Climate Protection Authority. And thank you very much for this very helpful workshop. My question is, I'm wondering how CARB plans to incorporate the inputs and priorities from the non-MSA jurisdictions, which Sonoma County is one of those, so that we will be eligible to apply for the implementation funding. Many of our local jurisdictions have already done quite a bit of work around climate action planning and are looking for funding to support those plans. And so I'm just curious how we align the local work that's been done here with the state plan that you're working on.
Thanks, Tanya. It's a really good question. So thank you for joining today. I think that's kind of one of the first steps, is just getting to know who is interested in working with the state out there, especially counties and cities and other local jurisdictions that don't have their own MSA planning grant. We definitely want to include you if you want to be included in our statewide process. We should stay in touch. I think I do have your email address, so that will be helpful. And I think our next touch point, a big public touch point, will be those in-person listening sessions that we mentioned this fall. We do plan to have one in the Bay Area, so hopefully that will be close to home for you and the county surrounding you, as well as the cities in your county. But in the interim, happy to be in touch and to set up whatever conversations make sense so that we can track what you're doing, stay in communication about what we're doing, and stay as coordinated as possible. Thank you for bringing up that question.
Next up, we have Gracina Mohabir. Gracina, you can go ahead, unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, this is Gracina Mohabir with Californians Against Waste. I just want to chime in with some quick feedback. We believe that the CPRG program could be an opportunity to help the state meet climate targets by funding really critical efforts to divert organic waste and recover edible food. These strategies benefit communities twofold by reducing methane, an extremely potent greenhouse gas, at the source, and also find a valuable end use for organic material that would otherwise be landfilled. And this would also be consistent with the range of priorities included in the scoping plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. And as well, if any of you, including the last commenter, would care to submit your comments and feedback, it creates a nice record for us to follow up. So I encourage you to follow the link on this slide here and submit any comments that you have in writing to us. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any hands raised, so if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand. If not, I guess I'll pass it back to Sarah Jo.
Great, thanks, Amanda. If we can proceed to just the next slide, just our last slide here. So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned before, any written feedback that people care to send to us, we have a link here where you can fill out a simple form, and it keeps a nice record of all of the comments that people have on this program. I just want to reiterate a big thank you to both all the state agencies and to Ray Saracino from EPA, who joined us today to offer information about their important climate work that they are doing, and that will inform our CPRG deliverables as we move forward. And thank you to all of the commenters who came and all of the listeners who spent your time learning about the CPRG efforts that California is undertaking. And we hope that this will be the first of many conversations, and really look forward to being in touch with all of you and to finding ways to together kind of maximize the emissions reductions and resources that we can get through CPRG and other federal funding resources. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.